Welcome to the Deep Dive. We've got a really fun challenge today. We're diving into a podcast episode all about building a better vocabulary. So get ready to unlock some serious word power. What's really cool is that the source material we're using is, well, another podcast episode on the exact same topic.
That's right. It's called English Globe, hosted by Sunny and Julia, and it's all about expanding your English vocabulary. So it's like a deep dive within a deep dive, right?
Totally. We'll be pulling out Sunny and Julia's best tips, but also looking at how they use language to teach us. Kind of meta, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's a great way to see these principles in action.
Okay, so Sunny and Julia start with a tip you've probably heard before reading, but they emphasize that it's not just about reading anything. You know, like picking up the first thing you see.
Right. It's about diversifying what you read.
Exactly. They suggest branching out, exploring different genres and styles of writing, even online blogs.
And they make a really interesting point about how the type of reading you choose can actually relate to your goals. Like, what if you're in tech? Reading science fiction could expose you to vocabulary that might inspire your work.
That's so cool. It's like planting seeds for future innovation.
Precisely. And that variety in reading helps you develop a more well-rounded vocabulary.
The Source podcast also stresses that just memorizing definitions isn't enough. They suggest keeping a word journal. But hold on, it's not just about jotting down definitions.
No, it's about using those new words in your own sentences, making examples that resonate with you, and of course reviewing them regularly.
It's making it personal, right? Like really owning those words.
Yes, and this approach actually taps into something called active recall. The more you actively engage with the word by using it, writing it, even thinking about it in different contexts, the more likely you are to remember it.
Oh, that reminds me of when I was studying for the GRE. I had this word journal, and I'd make up the most ridiculous sentences to help me remember the definition. It was actually really effective. Have you ever tried something like that?
Absolutely. I find that connecting a new word to a vivid image or a funny scenario can make a huge difference in remembering it.
So Sunny and Julia go beyond simple definitions, too. They highlight the importance of understanding synonyms, antonyms, and especially word families. I think word families are particularly interesting, don't you?
They really are. Think about the word care, for example. You've got careful, careless, carefree. Each word shares that same root, but with different prefixes or suffixes, they create a whole spectrum of meaning.
Right, it's like a mini etymology lesson.
Yeah.
But why wouldn't just knowing the definition be enough to recognize a word in different forms?
Because understanding a word's nuances through its family allows you to use it accurately in a wider range of situations.
So you're not just recognizing a word, you're actually mastering it.
Exactly. And on that note, understanding word roots can be a lifesaver when you encounter those complex technical terms.
Especially in fields where jargon is common. It's like having a secret decoder ring for language.
Exactly. It empowers you to truly understand those terms, not just memorize them.
Okay, so we've covered reading, word journals, word families. What else did Sunny and Julia suggest? Oh, right. They said that everyday conversations are a gold mine for vocabulary expansion.
Yes. Surrounding yourself with people who use diverse language, actively asking about unfamiliar words, and incorporating new words into your own speech, it can really make a difference.
If you're prepping for a presentation or a big meeting, practicing those new words in casual conversations can make you feel so much more confident when you need to use them in a more formal setting.
It's that psychological boost from actively using what you've learned.
It's like taking your vocabulary from the classroom to the real world.
Precisely.
And Sunny and Julia even suggest gamifying the whole vocabulary building process. What do you think about that?
I love it. Word games, quizzes, even those word of the day apps, they all add a fun element that can help you stay motivated.
I'm personally a big fan of the vocabulary.com app. It's like having a personalized vocabulary trainer. What about you? Have you found any games or apps you really like?
I'm actually quite fond of the classic crossword puzzle. It's a relaxing way to engage with vocabulary and etymology.
Oh, that's a great one. Okay, so we've got reading, word journals, understanding word families, and even gamifying the process. What else did Sunny and Julia talk about?
Well, they make a really strong case for the importance of context. They argue that learning new words in isolation doesn't cut it. You need to understand how those words function in real sentences, paragraphs, and conversations to really grasp their subtle shades of meaning.
Right, because you might memorize the definition of serendipitous as occurring by chance in a happy or beneficial way. But until you see it used in a sentence like, it was a serendipitous encounter that led to their lifelong friendship, you might not fully appreciate its true meaning.
Exactly. And context is also key to avoiding those awkward moments when you use a word inappropriately, like using a super formal word in a casual setting.
Like wearing a tuxedo to a barbecue, right? Not quite the right fit.
Precisely. And I know I've made my share of those mistakes.
Me too.
Hmm.
But speaking of missteps, Sunny and Julia encourage listeners not to be afraid of making mistakes when they're trying out their new vocabulary.
They emphasize that trial and error is a natural part of the learning process, and I couldn't agree more. The fear of making a mistake can really hold you back. But if you're too scared to use those new words, you'll never truly integrate them into your vocabulary.
They even compare it to learning to ride a bike. You're going to fall a few times, but eventually you find your balance.
And that's where feedback and correction come in. Constructive criticism, when received with an open mind, is incredibly valuable. It helps refine our understanding and use of language. Have you ever had a moment where someone's feedback helped you learn a new word?
But definitely. I once tried to use the word ubiquitous in a conversation, and I completely butchered it. My friend, well, they laughed and gently corrected me. It was a bit embarrassing at the time, but I never forgot the correct pronunciation or meaning after that.
Those are the learning moments that really stick with us.
Absolutely. So what struck me about this part of English Globe is that they weren't just talking about not being afraid of mistakes. Their own conversation actually demonstrated that point. The way Sonny and Julie interacted felt so natural and authentic. They weren't afraid to laugh at themselves or to admit when they didn't know something.
It definitely added a layer of authenticity to their message.
Okay, so before we move on to some of Sonny and Julie's other tips, I'm curious, what stands out to you the most from what we've discussed so far?
I think what's particularly insightful is how they emphasize that vocabulary expansion isn't about becoming a walking dictionary. It's not about showing off or using big words just to impress people.
Okay, so if it's not about that, then what is it about? What's the real purpose of all this effort to expand your vocabulary?
It's about empowering yourself to express your thoughts and ideas with greater clarity, precision, and impact. It's about understanding the world around you on a deeper level, connecting with others more effectively, and even discovering new ways of thinking.
I love that. So for you listening, remember that vocabulary expansion is a journey, not a destination. It's about finding the words that empower you to express yourself more effectively, understand the world more deeply, and connect with others in more meaningful ways.
And as Sunny and Julia so eloquently put it, it's about embracing the joy of discovering new words and the power they bring to your communication. It's a journey of lifelong learning and self-improvement.
Beautifully said. Now, I know Sunny and Julia had more to say about vocabulary building. They talked about the importance of active listening, leveraging technology, and even the role of emotions in learning new words. We'll dive into all of that and more right after this.
So before we went to that last bit, we were discussing how Sunny and Julia emphasized that vocabulary expansion isn't about becoming a walking dictionary. It's about finding words that work for you. And they actually gave a great example of that in their own conversation.
Oh, yeah. When they were talking about not being afraid to make mistakes, their interaction really showed that point. I mean, they were so natural and weren't afraid to laugh at themselves or to admit when they didn't know something.
Right. It's like they were saying, hey, listen to how we do it. They used such vivid language, varied their sentences, and even added a touch of humor to keep things interesting.
And that engagement is so key. When I listen to a podcast, if the hosts are genuinely enthusiastic and having fun, I'm way more likely to pay attention.
Absolutely. When we're actively interested in what we're hearing, we're far more likely to absorb the information. It's like the difference between, say, reading a dry textbook and having a conversation with a friend who's passionate about a topic.
Well, for sure. And speaking of conversations, Sunny and Julia bring up another point that I think is really important, this idea of active listening.
Yes. They emphasize paying attention to the words and expressions that other people use, not just in conversations, but in podcasts, presentations, even songs.
I've been trying to be more mindful of this lately, and I've noticed that when I actually focus on how people are using language, I pick up new words and phrases without even realizing it.
What's fascinating is that active listening engages multiple parts of your brain. You're not just hearing the words, but also processing their meaning, analyzing how they're used, and even mirroring the speaker's tone.
It's a total workout for your language skills. But active listening can be tough, especially with all the distractions we have these days.
A constant challenge in our digital world. But by consciously practicing active listening, we can turn those everyday interactions into vocabulary building opportunities.
Turning the world into a language lab. I like it. And Sunny and Julia also talked about another challenge many people face, finding the time and motivation to actually work on expanding their vocabulary.
Right, and they highlighted how technology can help us overcome those obstacles. They suggest using all the digital tools available for vocabulary building.
Like language learning apps, flashcard programs, online dictionaries.
Exactly. These tools can be incredibly helpful, and with the rise of personalized learning platforms, they're becoming even more effective.
It's like having a personal vocabulary tutor in your pocket. What are some of your favorite tech-based vocabulary tools?
I've found that even a simple spaced repetition flashcard app can be incredibly effective. It shows you words at increasing intervals, helping you commit them to memory.
That's a classic technique for a reason. It really works. I also love how some apps incorporate vocabulary learning into games and interactive exercises.
Making it fun and engaging is crucial. Which brings us back to Sunny and Julia's emphasis on making vocabulary expansion an enjoyable process.
Yes, they talked about finding ways to make it fun, whether that's playing word games, joining a book club, or just setting aside time to explore new words.
They also highlighted the role of emotions in learning.
Wait, emotions? What do emotions have to do with vocabulary?
Well, think about it. When you learn a new word that really resonates with you emotionally, you're far more likely to remember it. Whether it evokes a strong feeling or captures an experience you've had.
It's like hearing a song that expresses exactly how you feel. The lyrics just stick with you because they're so emotionally powerful.
Exactly. Sunny and Julia encourage listeners to find those emotional connections with words, to pay attention to how words make them feel, and to use words that evoke those feelings.
It's not just an intellectual exercise. It's about connecting with words on a deeper, more personal level.
And by doing so, we not only expand our vocabulary, but also enhance our emotional intelligence.
I love that idea. It's like vocabulary expansion becomes a journey of self-discovery, too. You know, it's amazing how we've covered so many different aspects of vocabulary expansion, from reading to active listening to technology. And Sunny and Julia have managed to bring all of these elements together so seamlessly in their podcast.
They're such skilled communicators. They create an experience that invites us to participate in the joy of language learning.
It's not just a podcast, it's an experience. We're engaging with these ideas and hopefully expanding our own vocabularies along the way. What do you say we take a moment to gather our thoughts before we dive into the final part of this episode?
Sounds good to me. I'm ready to see what other insights we can discover.
Great, we'll be right back.
Uh,
Okay, so we're back, and I feel like we've learned so much from English Globe already. Sunny and Julia really packed a lot into their episode.
They did. I think one of the big takeaways is that vocabulary expansion isn't just one thing. It's not like you just memorize definitions and you're done.
Right, it's so much more than that. We've talked about reading differently, keeping a word journal, having conversations, playing games, and even connecting with words emotionally.
And we talked about how technology can make it easier and more fun, too. It's like we have all these different tools we can use.
It can feel a little overwhelming, though.
Right.
Like, where do you even start? What would you say to someone who's feeling kind of lost with all of this?
That's a good question. I think the biggest thing is to figure out what works best for you. Because everyone learns differently.
So, experiment a bit. Find what you enjoy.
Exactly. If you love novels, try out different genres. If you're a visual learner, maybe try flashcards or mind maps. And if you're a social person, join a book club or talk to people who use interesting vocabulary.
Find your people. And I think it's important to remember that this isn't a race. You know, there's no finish line. It's a process of learning and growing that never really ends.
Totally. It's about being curious about language and enjoying the process of learning new words. And it's okay to make mistakes along the way.
You know, what I really like about Sunny and Julia is that they show that in their podcast. They're clearly passionate about language, but they're also down-to-earth and relatable.
They're like our guides on this vocabulary adventure, sharing their knowledge and excitement with us.
Their passion is definitely contagious. And I think that's a big part of successful vocabulary expansion. You have to find that spark, that joy and motivation that keeps you going.
Because when you're having fun, learning doesn't feel like work.
So for everyone listening, remember that building a better vocabulary isn't just about communicating better. It's about expanding your world, understanding things more deeply, and connecting with people in ways that you maybe couldn't before.
It's about finding your own voice and sharing your ideas.
Beautifully said. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought. Sunny and Julia talked about how, even with all the words we have, some things are still hard to express. Like those experiences and emotions that we just don't have the right words for yet.
That's where the magic happens. Language is always evolving, and we have the power to shape it.
Exactly. So as you keep learning, don't just learn new words, but think about the words that are missing. What things do you wish you had words for?
Maybe you'll even come up with your own words to fill those gaps.
That would be amazing, to add your own unique contribution to the world of language.
The possibilities are endless.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into vocabulary. We hope you've learned something new and maybe even discovered a new love for words. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep playing with language.